coming. This is the first lecture in the series of Christ Music Center lectures. We do this every year for the last, 6 or 7 years now. And these lectures feature some aspect of music, often international music, world music, although not entirely. We are going to have a West African kora player on, I think it's November 12th. I'm not sure of the date. Is that right, Allison? Do you remember? The 8th. And I present these with my co-producer, Allison Arnold, who has been my colleague for more than 10 years, organizing programs and teaching courses in world music here. And it's been a privilege to work with her. So the first lecture of the season is myself. And I am going to be talking about a trip that I took this summer to Ethiopia and Uganda in reverse order. And I'm going to probably unsuccessfully try to keep my comments to a minimum and primarily show you videos that I took with a little handheld camera after my nice camera got stolen on the 3rd day. More of that in just a minute. But the sound is good, and primarily what I want you to pay attention to is the soundscape of East Africa. West Africa? Of East Africa as I encountered it. And so some of the videos are going to be, so I'm going to just play them through to the end. They'll be a little bit long, maybe a little bit boring, I don't know. Just settle in. It's not going to be a flood of information about East Africa, although you might pick up something along the way. But primarily I'd like you to sort of settle in and listen to some of the sounds that I encountered on the road and in the cities and towns of East Africa. So here's the region that I was in. Kenya, of course, has been much in the news, and Kenya borders on Somalia, which is one of the hot spots, trouble spots in the world right now. And Uganda is on the other side of Kenya and borders on Rwanda, also a hot spot, and Congo. We all know that there's been a raging civil war going on in the eastern part of Congo. And southern Sudan, of course, there's a border missing here. The nation state most recently added to the United Nations draws the line right about there, South Sudan. And so the region has seen a lot of upheaval, a lot of chaos. There's a lot of poverty. There's a lot of political either instability or repression. It sort of alternates between one and the other in this region, in the governments and in the social settings. And yet at the same time, it's a region rich in expressive culture. And the aesthetic richness and sophistication of the people that I met and the events that I was able to witness were utterly remarkable. I was totally surprised and taken aback by the remarkable nature of the expressive culture of this region. And so that's what I'm going to be focusing on. Of course, there's a great deal else to focus on in this region. We could talk about politics and other aspects of social life, but this talk is primarily about the aesthetics, and I don't want the aesthetics to mask these other critical issues. But for tonight, let's maybe take a step back from trying to save the world and appreciate people whose lives are lived in perhaps a lot more stress than ours is, and yet they're able to rise above the daily frustrations and dangers of their life in order to fill their hours and days with such rich beauty. So my first stop was Uganda. Why Uganda, and how did this whole thing happen? Well, I've got to get out of the PowerPoint for a minute. There was an organization, I'll find it. It's already open here somewhere. Here it is. Teachings Tour Sojourners, TATS, T-A-T, oops. Hello? Really? Maybe I won't show you this. Maybe you can only read the PowerPoint. Yeah, this is exactly. Let's see if this will come back. All right, so it can't show anything outside of the PowerPoint. We've been having a few technical troubles. So there was an organization called TATS, Teaching and Travel Sojourners. I guess they were sending emails out to, listservs of educators around America. But they were very clever about targeting it. They seemed to know who I was, although I'm not really anybody that anyone far away would know about. But they started writing me about 4 years ago, inviting me to come to Uganda, at my own expense, of course. But they would set up programs for me to lecture, at various universities, and that was the idea. A university professor with some kind of expertise. Mine is particularly useless in these contexts. I don't do hydrology or sociology. I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of needs that American expertise or Western expertise would be very useful, and my area of expertise, which is music, is rather useless in those contexts. But nevertheless, they were writing to me and asking me to come and lecture. And I said, yes, I would love to come, but the opportunity never arose, and I put it off and put it off and put it off, but they kept me on the hook, like a good fisherman. And finally the opportunity arose. I got some funding from the distance ed program that Allison and I teach in, to use my experiences in East Africa to supplement our world music course. And so it all the pieces fell into place. At the same time, the fall semester of a year ago, I had a student from Ethiopia in my class, Leah Welde Gabriel, maybe some of you know her, very exceptional student. And it's been an area of the world that I've been fascinated with, and so I talked to her and I said, I'd love to go to Uganda. Well, it turns out, to Ethiopia, and it turns out that the way to get to Uganda is on Ethiopian Airlines, which always stops in Addis Ababa. So I figured, well, that's a nice, convenient thing. I could do kind of a piggyback, 2 weeks in one week in the other, and that's how the whole thing worked out. So, through a friend of mine, a colleague at Duke, Paul Berliner, again, some of you know Paul, he knew a graduate student, at the time a graduate student, at the Grieg Conservatory in Norway, finishing his PhD from Uganda. And he said the fellow finished his PhD last year and he's back in Uganda teaching at Makerere University. Wouldn't it be nice to have that kind of academic contact? So I wrote to him, and he quickly responded, and between TATS, this organization, and Nicholas Sempige, who you'll meet in just a few minutes, quite a wonderful tour was laid out for me, getting a lot of entree into worlds that I wouldn't have managed to get myself into, perhaps otherwise. I arrived in Uganda on June 3rd, not knowing that this was one of the most important holidays in Uganda and in all of East Africa, for that matter. It's called Martyr's Day. Karoli Luanga and his companions, there were 22 companions, were put to death in the I can't remember the year, I should have known, I should have looked it up, 1888, something like this, were put to death by the former king of the kingdom of Baganda, because, Uganda was being missionized by both Anglican and Catholic missionaries, and the Catholic missionaries, some were from France, some were from England, and they were in competition with each other for converts, and the Anglicans, and the situation was getting very confusing, right? Where all of these missionaries were looking for converts, and the king finally said, stop, enough. And, no one will be Christian. If you guys can't agree on what it is to be a Christian, then we will have none of it. And there were some members of his immediate inner household, pages, I guess they were, young men who were serving the king in a variety of administrative capacities, who had already converted to Roman Catholicism. Several of them had converted to Anglicanism. But nevertheless, they were told that either they would convert or they would, die. They would be burned at the stake. And they chose martyrdom. And so they were martyred. They were burned at the stake. And this, in East Africa, is one of the most enormous events in modern history. So I arrived on this day. This is one of the icons of these martyrs. You could see them in the fire. They were. This is all of them. Each, the school kids all know each one of these figures. They all have some identifying mark, just like, St. Peter, St. Paul. This is the shrine which is built at the place of their martyrdom. And on June 3rd, the anniversary of this event, millions descend on this little basilica. So I had chosen a YouTube to show because I wasn't able to take video. Actually, I was able to take video, but they were in the old camera that was stolen, right? So I don't have any of this. I was at Woodstock, folks, and trying to get out of Woodstock was nothing like trying to get through the crowds that I encountered. We arrived just as everyone was leaving. So we were driving in against the traffic. I mean, there must have been at least 2 million people. I've never been in such a crowd. So I missed the whole event there, but except for the inconvenience of arriving, going against the tide of a sea of humanity. But primarily the event is marked by performance, by music, by dancing, but we'll be talking more about that in just a minute. So maybe I should just pause for a minute. We have some empty seats. Maybe we can get some folks to sit down. So maybe you could raise your hand if you're next to an empty seat, and we can have these folks sort of filter on in. So I'll continue. So while my interest was in music of any and all varieties, and I did see quite a bit of, restaurant bands and hip hop and all different genres and types in a very short amount of time. It was quite compressed, but very, very rich. They had me running from pillar to post. I was primarily interested in sacred music because there's an incomplete chapter in our curriculum that I was trying to sort of kill two birds with one stone. East Africa was underrepresented, and we were trying to finish this chapter on sacred music in our curriculum, and so I thought that would be what I would concentrate on. So I'm just going to give you some of the soundscape of religious music in the capital of Uganda, Kampala. This is from the outside of a little Catholic church. It's choir practice. Just a few seconds long, this video. That's my finger. You'll see that again several times. I'm not much of a photographer. At a mosque near the university, Makerere, we met the muezzin, the man who sings the call to prayer 5 times a day, and asked if we could record him actually in the act of performing it. And they welcomed us, Nicholas Sempeje, my friend and guide, and I, to the mosque to record it. And it was, just a beautiful, sacred moment to spend. And then, of course, that film was in the camera that was stolen. So we went back to the mosque and said, "Can we do it again?" And they were quite gracious in welcoming us and letting us film it. So here's the complete Adhan. Most of it you'll see the muezzin actually performing it into a microphone, but then the camera will take you around the mosque, and then a little bit of the prayer service that they welcomed me to. And after the prayer service, as I'm walking out, the imam pats me on the back and said, "So, did you like it?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You're going to convert?" I said, "I'll think about it." And he laughed, and we both laughed. Like, the whole thing is just like, people are getting so upset about, the things that separate us and ignoring the very enormous things that unite us. This will run about 7 minutes.
Okay.
Down the road, there was a small evangelical church near the guest house where I was staying. I was staying at the Adonai guest house that was primarily serving American missionaries that were coming over to work in orphanages and help out as best they could. They were lovely people that I met. And then, so I'll just play just a little bit of the sounds of this. This was choir practice also, choir night. Cuts off the whole bottom part of the video. That was taken with a little iPhone. And so I wanted to go on a Sunday, and the cook at the guest house said, well, why don't you go to a real rockin' church on a Sunday if you want to really hear some gospel music. There is a downtown mega church called Watoto, and some of this might look familiar to some of you. I think it means praise. Oops. We already saw that one, didn't we? Let's try this again. Oh, I'm not sure what happened to what. There it is. Two of them got put together. So I'm walking into this church. It's already started. There's at least 1,000 people in this hall. Can't really tell from this video how deep it goes. To take a trip out to Jinja. Let me just go back to the map. This is what I was supposed to do when I rehearsed it in my head, is show you the places that we're going to be visiting here. This is Kampala. Entebbe is the airport. Maybe some of you remember Entebbe from the Israeli commandos that liberated a hijacked airplane famously in this airport. It's right on the lake, Lake Victoria, the largest inland sea really in Africa. And so from there we went from Kampala up to Jinja, which is here. Jinja is right at the source of the Nile. This is what, well, I'll give you the details of that when we get to it. But the Nile River starts here, and then 4,000 miles away, it finally reaches the Mediterranean Sea. I think it takes 3 months. The water that you're seeing flowing out of the lake, 3 months later, that which reaches the Mediterranean pours into it. And then we're going to go down to Masaka, down here on the lake, and eventually we end up almost to the Tanzania border. Down here you'll see some shots of these places. So here's the road to Jinja. This is Larry Council, who was my guide with Tats, and he was absolutely marvelous, and his daughter Chiara. He set up all these lectures. I taught elementary school kids how to sing I've Been Working on the Railroad, and I worked with graduate students in music education and did career counseling, like I know anything about this. But anyway, they put me to work. I did, I don't know how many, 8 or 9 formal talks while I was there. Say hi. Oh, she's a movie star. Whoa. Hi, Kyra. Yeah, there's my famous finger again. You see it? See the grooves? Much is rather dingy as you go down the road, except for beer signs. You see them, and they're newly painted, and they look really snazzy. And they're not cell phones. I mean, little mobile phones where you buy SIM cards. That's how it works. So you're constantly running out of time, and then you have to go to these little shops and buy a new little card to put in your phone. And those shops seemed to be prospering. Everything else was kind of run down. There's Coca-Cola. You've heard of that, right? There's cell phone. There's cell phone. Beer. That's good. Club. And Pearl. Had some of that too. Coca-Cola again. A lot of the time when you're on a trip like this, you're spending on the move, looking out the window of a car, like being in a little bubble, moving through the world, trying to grab everything that you can. The curiosity is always far greater than what's going to be satisfied. So here we are at the source of the Nile River. This is where the root water flows out of the lake, and 4,000 miles away reaches the Mediterranean. So this is the third of my friends. We met Larry Council from Tats and Nicholas Sempige from Makerere University. You'll see him again. This is James Isabirie from Chomongo University, head of the teacher education program. And they're playing, I can't remember the name of the instrument, the thumb piano. It's not in Vira, that's in Zimbabwe. I mean, it's the same instrument, fundamentally the same principle. I can't remember what they call it. So he leads a culture troupe called the Sons of the Nile. And you'll see more of that in just a minute. A Nile beat, that's what it's called. And anyway, you got the idea. And he was playing with his friend Haruna Walusimbi, who they've been playing since college. For 20 years they've been playing together like this, and they put together a whole troupe. And here's some other members of their troupe playing the Akadinda, which is this double-barreled xylophone. You have one guy sitting on one side, one guy sitting on the other side. I've never seen that anywhere else. In Guatemala, they kind of all line up on the same side of a marimba. But here they're going one against one, and they get this thing going with these interlocking rhythms that are just really extraordinary. Let's get in on it here. So this is James. He's right now in the process of visiting all 100 districts of Uganda with his troupe and with organizing local troops in this music festival that goes on for 3 months, all sponsored by Senator Beer. He himself is, by religious persuasion, a teetotaler, and so he has these moral qualms of organizing festivals that are promoted by and in turn promote the beer company, but no one else is giving any money for music and culture, so he figures he'd better get it where he can. So now we're on the road to Masaka in the south with Nicholas Sempije, and we arrive at this little factory where they make the drums and the fiddles and other traditional instruments. I'll just show you a little bit of this. It's because the earth is moving under my feet. That's why it jumps around like that. Not really. So this is where they're made. It's just like right out on the side of the road. The piles of wood. These are the necks for the fiddles.
Okay, the words are Damali, Sigula, Tagala, Tagas. And then the other words are like Peregalasa, Igiriza Bulunji, Naechimuta, Kubogolo.
He's explaining how the drum talks.
The name given to these original French priests. This Peregalas, that is the name, preaches very well, but he sometimes backs to the congregation. So that is the thing. So it is Damali. Now this is the danger, inviting people. I have danger time. All you people come. Gwanga is like nation come, nation come. So wherever you hear that there is danger, please come and give assistance. Yeah. So that is just some of it. There are many rhythms. So it's not only a musical instrument. When we start playing, you saw Nyeke and Togoro can be played here, Baksinda can be played here, a number of drum rhythms. But socially there are many meanings for the drum. For example, in the bars, it acted as a musical instrument, but not musically, but something to show the peak, that point where you've had a little bit.
Saying that you beat the drum when you've had a little bit too much to drink. So it's a social instrument, not just a musical instrument, but it literally talks. Here they're making the barrels for the fiddles called endingidi. So that's all of the drum. What was drum?
Chichokola ekyo mukulu tunnyonnyolenga bw'okola giving us an explanation.
putting the peg, this one-string fiddle.
Yeah. That is unprocessed one, so it's now all of it. And then this one is fine, kind of finishing the fiddle before connecting the various parts.
So these are some of their keys. And because of the skill, soon they will be the owners of this store.
Yeah. Lovely. We were on our way to the Bukalasa Seminary in Masaka, a boys' secondary school, where Nicholas had gone to school. He was taking me to meet the father, the headmaster of the school. He's Roman Catholic. And we were going down for a song festival that happens there every year. In fact, Nicholas wrote his doctoral dissertation on this particular set of events that goes on in the Diocese of Makasa and all over the country in Roman Catholic centers, where the secondary school students compete for prizes by singing sacred songs. Up until 1963, all Catholic churches had to use the same music. You probably know about this. And then the reforms of Vatican II allowed for local expressions of the local culture in worship. And that caused an explosion of creativity as new African music, African composers were supplying the church with locally created musical forms. So that's what I was interested in, and you'll see some of this as we go through these videos. So this is a quick tour of the seminary, as it's called. It's really like Cardinal Gibbons. It's a high school. Just wanted to show you this. To get there, you had to go to the other side of the equator. It was a very big deal. And now we're on the grounds of the seminary. This is their music room. Some of these instruments were donated to the school by German soldiers after the First World War. Yeah, they're still using them. You see instruments like this at a museum. You don't see them in a school. Of course, they've got the traditional instruments, the military drums, the whole panoply of the colonizer and the colonized in this room. There's a cello case, an old euphonium, the music stands, ancient. The harps, these are of course the indigenous harps of this culture. You'll see more of those soon. The harp lutes. I don't think I have any video of that, of this instrument. You'll see the panpipes, the xylophones. And last but not least, oh no, we got some keyboards still coming. And of course, the laptop. The electric Casio keyboard. I guess that was the Yamaha, the twin manual, 3-manual organ. I don't know if it's playable anymore. The electric speakers, the amplifiers. There's old Saint Cecilia and the famous painting by Raphael. and the tuba. We'll leave that. So we went from school to school over 3 days, watching the students rehearsing for the big festival. And I'll just show you a couple of these. These students have been standing out here in the sun for 3 hours, singing these same 3 songs over and over and over again. I don't know, pedagogically, but nevertheless, I mean, this is how they did it. So there were 3 categories. You had to sing 1 song in English, 1 song in Buganda, which was the local language, but in a Western idiom, and then 1 traditional African style song. And the African style song could also involve dance and sort of like it could be like a little play. So you'll see some of that in just a minute. But it was really something to be with these kids. Schools had to sing the same song. I heard this over and over and over again in all the different schools. But the traditional one, they could choose their own. Written by African composers, right? So this isn't like European, it's, you know. So here I'm giving a little conducting lesson to this sister who was having trouble getting them all to cut off together. I don't know if I was very helpful. I'm like a choral conductor. Oops. I've uploaded the wrong video. This was all supposed to be 2 minutes long, and it's so this is their traditional number. They've got the xylophone and the harps. Most of the kids didn't know how to play them. The point was to hold one. They didn't tune them, you know. It was all a little bit ad hoc. They got a bunch of the indingities going over here. But what they lacked in, what should we call it, tightness, they more than made up for in enthusiasm. So here's the... I'm sorry, this was supposed to be a different... So this is Jesus riding into Jerusalem on the back of the donkey. This is the donkey, right? So this school was an agricultural trade school, almost to the Tanzanian border. And let me just see if I can find this So here's a little bit of this is where these kids are from that you just heard singing. These are fishermen, a fishing village on Lake Victoria, about an hour north of the Tanzanian border. What's this guy doing? Looks like a Van Gogh painting, that little lineup of cottages to me. We're supposed to show a little boy running down with a hoop, but I had uploaded the wrong video. So, on to the next. Then we get to the day of the festival. And I was standing way in the back. I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of people there, and they see the Muzungu. That was me. Muzungu is the foreigner. Muzungu, I heard that word everywhere I went. Come on up, come on up, come on up. And I got the front row seat right by the stage, and I got to watch this. They were on the part of the contest for the traditional number, and so you'll get to see some of these dances. Oh, this is the right. This should be.
Olunaku lulungi akasana kasoose ne kasirikamu kalina kakwoca owuuli nga kyolabo kinyumirwa nengeri ono omuzungu malala akwataaomutiko webali kuwagira Uganda omuzungu oyo mugandi mwagala nnyo. Come you find that so that you can come inside.
So here we go. Watch the kids on the drums. This kid here. The next group. These are the judges there with that bottle of water. So they ring a bell, and from that point on, they can either gain points or lose points. There was the bell. They choose a student to be the drum major, so to speak, the equivalent, the director. school, and then they let it fly with 1,000 different hairdos. But you can see why, because in high school they had to have it short like this. But they could dance. Let's show you one more.
Because of one Manchester hospital. Nginakuziwa mwezi musanvu gw'omusanvu kisiribi kanaana wewandiise akadde ojowulira empendo.
Out of the same system. This has been going on for decades, perpetuating the little skits, the songs, the dancers. This was the fourth group that I filmed. I had this little tiny girl right in the front row. The way PowerPoint loads it, it's cutting off the bottom. The feet. And off they go. And again, this is all in a religious context, right? They're celebrating, well, which thing? The resurrection, the entrance into Jerusalem, they pick a scene that's jubilant, and then they make it an opportunity for this local expression. So this is what Nicholas had done his research on. He's spent 3 years studying these dance festivals, and the thrust of his argument had to do with this concept of globalization. We talk about globalization where, these streams of international commerce, politics, colonization, and religion, sort of export and impose into various degrees of severity cultural forms, throughout the global systems. That's globalization. We're familiar with much of that. Technology follows that, those pathways, and political systems and musical systems also. And then there's localization, which is the use of the local forms of artistic expression. The drums, the thumb pianos, the flutes, the panpipes. But then there's something in between that he's and other scholars have called globalization, which is the midpoint. Sort of like The Gods Must Be Crazy, where the Coke bottle falls out of the airplane, they pick it up and they say, well, what can we do with this? Right? That these global forms that are exported around the world enter these local situations, local communities, local cultural systems, and become, those parts of it that are useful become adapted and enriched by and hybridized by local forms of expression, and you have, this enormous richness that's neither one nor the other. It's a mediation, a constant negotiation between the global systems and the local environment. Which brings us to Ethiopia. I flew into Addis Ababa and traveled north to Lalibela, which is the site of some of the most remarkable architectural structures in the world. Most people don't know about this. Why this isn't up there with the pyramids of Giza, I don't know. I'll show you some pictures in just a minute. In Addis Ababa, there's a phenomenon known as the culture restaurant. I'd heard about these when I was in Uganda. Make sure you go to a culture restaurant. So I'll just show you a few clips of what you enjoy along with your meal. Have you eaten at any of the Ethiopian restaurants around town? There's the Abyssinia restaurant, Ashe in Kerry, where you get the food on this kind of bread made of the grain teff, and the various sauces and meats and vegetables, and you pull the bread apart and you soak up all the juices and you slather your face with it. It's quite good. And while you're doing that with your fingers, you're listening to this really magnificent music. In the 12th century, the Holy Lands were no longer accessible because of conquest and just the tribulations of trying to get to the Holy Lands from Ethiopia. So Uganda was evangelized by missionaries at the end of the 19th century. Ethiopia was evangelized by St. Philip in 45 AD, a representative of the king of Ethiopia converted to Christianity, within 100 years of Christ's life. And Ethiopia became a Christian nation with its own Orthodox church that has a 2,000-year history. Quite remarkable. I learned a lot about it, but I'm not going to, that's the subject of a different talk. I mainly just wanted to show you these images. So in the 12th century, the pilgrimages to the Holy Land were blocked. And the king at the time, whose name was Lalibela, had a dream that he could reconstruct the Holy Lands in Ethiopia, and then people wouldn't have to go so far. So he found a little stream that he renamed the River Jordan, and built the Holy Lands there. And instead of piling rock upon rock like the Goths did to build the cathedrals, he took a big sort of a monolithic cliff, sort of like Ayers Rock, these just big rocks, and hollowed the whole thing out into 11 churches. So all these 11 churches are cut from a single block of stone. I don't know that there's any place else in the world. Petra in Jordan is often mentioned in conjunction with these churches. The most famous one is this one, St. George's Church, which is in the form of a cross. I mean, you can't really see, but this is 40, 50 feet down. This is the top, right? And the whole thing is hollowed out inside. It's a church. You go inside, and there's the altar, and there's the choir, and the place for the congregation. You'll see some interiors. It's very hard to film this, but cut right out of the ground. So I arrived at Lalibela at the feast of St. Michael, the archangel. And just like, remember, I arrived in Uganda on June 3rd. I arrived in Ethiopia on June 22nd at Lalibela. 20,000 pilgrims descended on this place. And so I'll show you some videos of this. This is early in the morning of the feast day, around 6 a.m. And this is the interior of one of those churches. There are 11 of them, filled with incense and chanting congregants. That serves as a passageway between the churches. You can see the speakers have been set up and the priests are chanting the liturgy of the feast day and broadcasting it throughout this valley. These men, pilgrims, have walked how many days to get there, and they're following along the liturgy. It's like listening to Gregorian chant as if it were still practiced in its continuous form in a language that nobody speaks anymore, a language called Giz. Many Giz speakers. So usually the entire liturgy is performed inside these churches. So the churches have a continuous history of use. But the archbishop was ill. He couldn't make it, because it's difficult to climb into these labyrinths. So they had much of the ritual outside in the fields above, as you'll see in just a minute. I just have to skip around in the interest of time. So then around 7 or 8 in the morning, If you've been to India and heard the Vedas recited, it sounded like that to me, just hours of text being recited. This is looking inside of one of those churches. It's still very early in the morning. And now we're coming out of the church. I mean, this place is in the middle of nowhere. What these people had to go through to get to this place on this day, I can only imagine they must have walked all night, and maybe they walked for days. So now they're processing the relics of the church out through the crowds. And the most sacred relic of all is a replica of the Ark of the Covenant that's believed to be kept in a church in Axum containing the original 10 Commandments. But they're about to bring out the banners and the icons and the relics. Here they come. The excitement level is simply palpable as the things got closer.
St. Michael.
That's St. Michael. They're waiting for the procession to come through the crowd. Just like in a medieval church in France in 1300. Taking the relics out of the church and parading them around in the streets of the village or the town. I don't want you to have to wait. So then they all sort of moved the whole assembly down to this little altar that was set up for the archbishop. And over here, you have this row of priests who through this whole, it must have gone on for 2 hours, are dancing through the whole thing. It was quite a spectacle. I'm way up on a hill filming down, so it's hard to get good shots, but they have these instruments called cisterns. Maybe some of you have heard of this instrument. It's like a little rattle, a little shaker, and just for hours, they just did this swaying dance. Well, so etc. It goes on and on. That night, of course, I had to go out for a beer. You know, you can get only so holy, at least I can. And it really was moving. I don't mean to sound, you know, like a Philistine. But we did go out for drinks after that night. And one of these praise singers called an Asmari, the local version of the bard, was performing in the restaurant on singing and playing this instrument called the masenko that I told you I would come back to. A group of friends or a couple, and he'd walk up to their table and he'd sing about them. He'd make something up. He sang about me. Who knows what he said, of course. But the light was very dark, so I asked him if we could go back the next morning and film in the restaurant when there was more light. So this is the next morning, actually. I'm a cello player, you know, so of course I was very interested, and he let me try it out. I wasn't able to really do anything on the instrument, but it was fabulous to simply hold one of these. And then finally, we flew into Addis Ababa and then drove back. It was a full day on this dirt road. And then it was a day to get to an asphalt road, and then another day back to Addis. And this is what the landscape looked like. Where is this man walking? There it is. The sound of the engine, the car's engine. Here's the driver who knew the song and joined in. It's the mother. Dance for him, he said. They have this shoulder thing. I had seen it at the restaurant in Addis Ababa, and here I saw the kid on the side of the road. And I said, do you mind if I see your house? Then a woman came running down, come see my house too. But we had to go. And then scenes from the side of the road. Now we're on the tar road. And then one more thing, then I'll let you go. Two more things. You don't see this every day in North Carolina. Come back the other way. In Ethiopia are the Gelada baboons. And there's a theorist who thinks that a certain behavior that the Geladas do is perhaps the way music became a behavior that became instinctive in humans. When these families with, a couple dominant males and a bunch of females, as they move across the landscape, if there's a quarrel between members of the little group, they all sort of get together and they stop and they start making the sound in synchrony with each other. Jing, 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 jing. And by synchronizing their sound, they synchronize their emotions, supposedly, according to this theorist, and therefore they can sort of lower the energy. And so that his idea is that music in humans began as a group, a social behavior. Sure, why not? So I wanted to see these Gelada baboons, and at the very end of our trip, we crossed the Rift Valley, as you'll see, what that means, the Rift Valley, and there were the Geladas that I had wanted to see since I arrived in East Africa. Here's the male. He's a big guy. It's like Wild Kingdom here. This is all with telephoto, so it's hard to get the camera to hold still. Oh. Come back here. Oh. You get the idea. I guess you're going to miss the scene of the Rift Valley, where it's simply a crack in the earth. I mean, and all of a sudden you're looking down a cliff about 4,000 feet. And these monkeys, these baboons are right there at the edge of this precipice, and that's where they it's quite an extraordinary, dramatic place to find them. So at any rate, then I flew home. Here I am. That's the trip. If we could bring up the lights, if any of you have any questions, be glad to entertain some questions. I think we have some time. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, there was cloth. There was, sort of bundles of clothes behind that bed. I don't know if you could see that, but there wasn't much. There was very little in the way of sort of things. Very simple. It's one of the most impoverished corners of the earth right there. People don't have much. One of the things that you saw everywhere was children carrying these yellow polyurethane jugs of water. That's what they would do after school. They would gather water for the evening's cooking. Often it involved walking 4 or 5 miles in either direction, and you maybe had to do the trip twice. And so everywhere you saw, when it was the end of the school day, for those that were lucky enough to even go to school, they were carrying the jugs, and every once in a while you saw one with wheels on it. And you sort of thought, why don't they all have wheels on them? In China, where I'd seen similar things on the Central Plateau, they had these arrangements with water. At least they had wheels on them when they had to go off, instead of carrying them as they used to with the 2 pails on the pole. But in East Africa, both in Uganda and in Ethiopia, I saw this a great deal, and almost always the kids were carrying, little kids, 5, 6 years old, carrying the water jugs. You saw it everywhere. Yeah, a question up here? Yes?
Some of the instruments that you showed seem to have hair on them. Do you know what that was and if it served a function other than decoration? And some of the skirts of the dancers.
Yeah, it's all decoration, but it has a ritual function. The whisk with the horsehair is a symbol of royalty. And all of those fiddles will have that little hunk of hair, but it's purely decorative. It doesn't have any acoustical function.
Is it animal hair?
It's horsehair.
Horsehair.
Yeah. Yes.
What did they eat?
All of them pretty much chewed cat. That's K-H-A-T, you know what this is? And you saw it growing everywhere along the side of the road, and you saw them harvesting it. It's like the big crop. It's sort of like coca is in the Andes. It's an appetite suppressant, and it's a mild narcotic. And much of this region, from Yemen through Eritrea, Somalia, they all consume vast quantities of cotton. They eat teff. Teff is this very tiny little grain that they make that bread out of. And you see teff growing on the side of the road a lot. And then, just the usual beans, pulses. It's a very simple diet. Yeah, what did they eat? I don't know what they eat. What did I eat? I ate a lot of teff in Ethiopia, and I liked it. I liked the food. I like eating, I like food. And I like trying different things.
Those skins are the skins that you saw fellas make, the drums that you made, and something like that.
All of the drums were skins. Yeah, like goat skins and cow skins. Yeah, it's all skin. Yes?
You showed us some Muslims, but not a lot of musical culture there. Would you say that, at least in Africa, that Christian musical culture would be...
Yeah, it's a good question. So they don't practice music a great deal, or really at all, in sacred settings in the mosque, right? I mean, in the mosque there are no musical instruments. All there is this form of chant, both the chanting of the Quranic texts, and the call to prayer, which each follow very careful formulas so that it doesn't sound like music. So it's not music. Right? It's a different category. Sounds to us Westerners like music, but they don't call it music. It sounds like singing. But they find it just sort of a formal kind of speech, a controlled form of speech that has pitch and contour. Outside of that, socially, the Muslims make music like anyone else. They have parties and they beat the drums. And my friend James's partner playing the thumb piano, he's Muslim. One of the professors of music at the university was Muslim who had converted to a Pentecostal Christian, and it was very controversial, of course. Conversion is a very big deal in the Islamic community. But yeah, so, in terms of sacred settings, there's not a lot of Sufism in this part of East Africa that I could find. But in other parts of the Islamic world, in Indonesia, in Pakistan, for instance, in India, there's an enormously rich sacred music culture, but not in this part of Africa as far as I can tell. It's a very good question. Yes? No? Good night. Thank you.